Why are there so many leaders in the C-suite named Bob, Jack, John, or Dick? Why are there so few leaders in the C-suite who are women? Why are there even fewer leaders in the C-suite who are women of color or people of color? And why are there so few leaders in the C-suite who are LGBTQ plus, who are non-binary or trans? And why are there so few leaders in the C-suite who are disabled? Well, maybe because the C-suite offers a safe haven for toxic masculinity. Let's acknowledge the current work environment in the US was created by a very privileged group, commonly referred to as the white male patriarchy, a particular subset of the Caucasian population that has rarely, if ever, experienced systemic bias or discrimination in the workplace or the world. Let's also acknowledge that this system is not set up to give anyone who is considered diverse the same opportunities, advantages, or connections that are given to and expected by this very privileged group. But why should that stop you? If you're called to step into a role of higher leadership so you can create the change and make the difference so needed at this time, I am talking to you and I want you to succeed. If you're diverse, if you're female, POC, LGBTQ plus, or disabled, or all four, I want to see you succeed. Now more than ever, the world needs emotionally intelligent leadership, leaders with a diverse range of experience, perspective, and backgrounds, leaders who are empathetic, collaborative, leaders who act with integrity, leaders who make decisions based on what will benefit the greater good, not the chosen few. And I know that my guest today is in complete agreement with me on this topic. Ricky Koo is a seasoned corporate executive, entrepreneur, speaker, and writer. He's also a certified career and self-development coach. And I am honored he agreed to be my guest today. Ricky, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's so great to be here, and I could not agree more with everything you just said.
I am so glad you're here. Well, let's jump in. Um, I shared my reasons why I think it's so important we have greater diversity in senior leadership. Please share your reasons.
So from my point of view, it's twofold. One is it's good for business in general. So
Yes. Yeah.
studies have shown that diverse management teams can drive revenue up, by more than 20%, right? That is significant. And so just starting with some of the numbers, it's like a no-brainer. Of course, we would want more diversity. Um, if we think about the people also that we're trying to attract as leaders to enter the workforce, now more than ever, people are prioritizing diversity as one of the key things that they look for in future employers. Over 75% of people actually say diversity is important to me to dedicate my time in working a job for any company. And so even with that, um, if we think about then why is it important for the company overall to have something like diversity initiatives and things like that? It's because it creates more innovation as well. So what I've seen a lot of times is companies that have been around that are not startups, they kind of get stuck. They kind of get stuck in this place where they do what they historically have been doing and their growth kind of starts stifling and they start getting stagnant. But when you increase diversity and when you bring diversity of thought, diversity of experience, and diversity of perspective into this new environment, it creates a lot of creativity for people to feel safe in exploring. And what I've seen a lot of times is that actually leads to much better outcomes for the people. People are just generally happier to be able to see things in a different perspective. And also it helps the company overall because it leads to outcomes that drive more money in the end for businesses.
It's just a smart return to the bottom line. And you're absolutely right. There's greater employee engagement and
Hmm.
greater employee retention. And that also drives revenue. So,
Exactly.
in coaching a client who's diverse, who really wants to move up the leadership ladder, and we know there's the broken rung, and we know there's the leaky leadership pipeline, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of external obstacles. Where would you start with that client?
So usually what I see with my clients is there is such a heavy focus on technical skills. And that's something that people just have a mindset of, as individual contributors, you need to be very good at doing your job, right? Which is true. But as you move up and as you start getting into, first level management or middle management, there is a shift that needs to take place. And sometimes for minorities, especially, that shift isn't very intentional and they're not very aware of that shift that needs to take place. That shift is moving away from just focusing on being great at doing the work and being technical to being more strategic and intentional about how you influence people, how you communicate, how you problem solve, how you are resilient through change that may come up. Those are things that leaders look for when they want to promote people. But oftentimes, what I've seen a lot of is people who tend to be in underrepresented groups focus too much on the technical skills and they don't make that shift, which then creates the ceiling for them and they get stuck and they're not sure how to move forward as they look around and other people start getting promoted beyond them, even though they're very, very capable and they're very great at doing the work.
Right, it's that expertise that is a given, but there's that also that ability to go, "Oh, I need to manage up, and
Exactly.
I've gotta manage laterally as well as managing my team."
Right.
So, yeah, there are a lot of external challenges. Random question, but actually not so random. Why do you think there are so many incompetent leaders? Let me just throw that out there.
That's a great question. I've encountered a lot of incompetent leaders over the years. To be honest, I think it's because at the end of the day, incompetent leaders still get things done. They still have people that get the work done. That makes me think of this story that I'll share. I once worked for a senior leader um, at a large company, and this leader was known for yelling and cursing in meetings. And this person had people that were afraid to show up in meetings because they were like, "Ooh, how is he going to react today?" Right? And so this was a known brand of his, but he still delivered work because his team was still high achieving and they still got things done. And so from other leaders' standpoint, they may not have seen what happens behind closed doors. And so I was in a meeting with this particular leader one day. He was 2 levels above me at that time. And I had people from my team also in the meeting and people from his team. And we were collaborating together on this project that needed to get done. And all of a sudden, he flipped a switch and he started cursing and saying, "Well, you're not giving me what I need. I can easily go to the CFO right now. I don't give an F." And he started cursing. And I immediately was taken aback because this is the
Oh,
first time that I had ever experienced this from him. I had heard of these, but he never behaved that way in front of me. And so I immediately said, "We need to end this conversation right now because this is no longer productive and I need to speak with you afterwards." So we ended the conversation and I checked in with my employees, my team members afterwards, and they were shaking. They were shaken. They
yeah.
were, "What just happened? Is that normal?" And so I reassured them and said, "I'll take care of it. This is not normal. That is not how you carry yourself in a professional way." And so the next day, I let, time kind of pass a little bit overnight. And I set up a meeting with this person. And I told him very directly that the way you behaved and when you said X, Y, and Z, it made people very uncomfortable in the room. And that kind of behavior cannot happen again because that's not how we carry ourselves in a professional setting. And of course, he proceeded to be very defensive. And he even tried to change the story and say, "No, I never said that." And I said, "Yes, you did. These are the exact words you said." And he then said, "Well, Ricky, I'm sorry that embarrassed you." And I said, "That didn't embarrass me. I was embarrassed on behalf of you because of your behaviors and your actions." And so after that, he then had a couple days and he ended up actually sending me a message afterwards and said, "I reflected on my actions and what you said, and I feel like such a fool, and I'm sorry and I apologize." fast forward to a week later, I ended up did speaking with his boss, who at the
Mhm,
time was the executive VP,
mhm,
several levels above me, and
mhm.
I just felt like I needed to at least share this
Yeah,
information with him. And I said, "This is what happened. I took care of it. I had a conversation with him. There's no action needed on your end, but I felt like you should be aware as the most senior leader of this division." And his response was very surprising to me because his response was, "Wow, I've worked with him for over 15 years, and this is the first time that I've ever heard this kind of feedback." And in a way, it almost sounded as though he was saying, "Are you sure that's what
yeah.
happened in the meeting?" Right? There
Just
was there was almost a sense of believability in question there. And I was like, "Okay, that's interesting." But that just goes to show how deep incompetent leaders can get into an organization
exactly,
without other leaders seeing their impact, their negative impact on
right.
the people. And over time, I know that leader no longer works at the company that I was at before. But over time, what that creates is this toxic environment that
Exactly.
people will start leaving. You'll start seeing this pattern of people jumping ship and leaving. And that is never the outcome that you want. So I think there are a lot of incompetent leaders that exist because at the end of the day, when we look at the work still gets done.
Exactly.
But the question is at what cost, right? How
It
many people are you burning along the way? And how many people are you degrading along the way? That usually isn't worth it.
yeah, so agree with you, in corporations, if someone's fulfilling a function, even if they're, pouring gasoline on the fire, but that function's getting
Mhm.
done, everybody tends to ignore it, which is part of the problem with an environment. So
Absolutely.
talk about, I mean, that was an awesome story because haven't we always dealt with a screamer and, gotten, like, just, whoa,
Of
so
course.
upset with that. But I know you probably have a few stories, and I'm really curious, what was the story that made you say, "You know what? I have some information to share here, and I know that my information is gonna help other people."
Mhm.
What spurred you to start coaching?
It was actually thinking back on my own career. So thinking back on my old self. And
Mhm.
I still remember this very clearly. I used to work for one of the largest consulting and professional services firms. And I was very much a corporate worker. I was a hard worker, and I consistently got high ratings. And I was branded as, if you want something done right with high
What a
quality,
Ricky.
Ricky is your
Ricky's your
person.
guy.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. I was that person. And I remember working, of course, overtime, long hours. And there was one night in particular, I was at a client site, and my supervisor at the time came up to me and said, "You know what? We have to stay late again, and this weekend we have to come in again because it was busy time." And so I hit a point where I didn't even know that I was reaching burnout. But
right.
when my supervisor told me that, I almost broke down in front of him, but I didn't. And I ended up going to the bathroom, sat down in a stall, and I just started sobbing and crying. And I was like, "What am I doing to myself? Why am I working so hard? And yet I'm not really seeing any acknowledgement or growth or anything at that point." It
Mhm,
was just more and more work.
mhm,
And so when I think back on that, I see a very highly capable person, but someone that didn't really know how to advocate for themselves.
exactly.
And so when fast forward to now, I have a successful career. I've gone away from that, and I've been able to focus on the qualities and things that I developed myself on, like leadership and communication. And I realized that there is a need for me to help underrepresented people who may not have those instincts, who may not have those abilities to think, "Oh, something needs to change here," right? It doesn't add up where I'm doing all this great work, but I'm not seeing the outcome of getting
Right.
promoted, more money, everything that should follow with it. And so that really sparked my interest in giving back to the communities that I very much grew up from. And I also come from a psychology background. So I've always had
Oh,
this very, I would say, people driven perspective and passion where I'm highly empathetic with my clients and with just people I engage with in general. But I also have this hyper focus on action, right?
mm,
So that really sparked me to say, you know what? I need to create a business that actually can help people instead of me just being a corporate leader and helping my immediate team. I saw a lot more value and a lot more impact in being able to post on social media and reach out so that I can have a bigger impact on other people who may not be working for large companies already, who may be looking for more guidance in their career.
one of the things that you just mentioned, which I think is so critical, which because you know, I follow you on social media, I love your content,
Thank you.
is that ability to advocate for oneself. Because many times we're told, and we believe this lie of keep your head down, do your job, do a really great job, over deliver, you will be rewarded. And that is not the case in corporate. So when you have a client who comes to you and is having a hard time advocating for themselves, what are some of the tools you use?
I have that a lot where clients come to me and they're like, I just don't know what is getting in my way, right? And I would say 9 times out of 10, it's themselves. They're getting in their own way. So some strategies that I like to remind my clients on is stop looking externally for permission to be yourself.
Right.
Because just by being yourself, that is already something very unique. There's nobody else in the world out there that is just like you that can do what you do, how you do it. And so even just realizing that and believing that is something that can be very powerful because that shifts your mind to think, "Oh, what are the things that I need to go achieve now?" It shifts it from that to what can I do to be more myself in these situations so that I can shine and I can learn to advocate for myself in situations like that. Um, a concept that I like to also share, or more of an action that I like to share with my clients is it's okay to ask for help, right? Because
Yes.
a lot of times with high achieving people and highly reflective people, they tend to think I need to do everything myself, right? And I know if you're listening that you're very capable, right? You can do anything you want, but you can't do everything. And so one of the strategies that I actually ask my clients to do is to think about who are the people around them in their network, in their support systems that can help them in ways that can get them to the outcomes and the goals faster. Because it's not to say that they can't do it themselves, but there's a way that you can approach situations to meet your goals in a faster way if you start thinking about what are the areas where I can go ask for help or I can accept the help that is around me. And sometimes that's a blind spot that people don't really see because they tend to think, I need to do this all by myself.
That is really astute. Yeah, it's that inner challenge of I've got to make it happen and I can't ask for help. One thing I want to share with all the listeners, Ricky has very graciously offered a complimentary coaching call. So if you are someone who is navigating corporate culture and you want to step into a role of higher leadership, you can find Ricky at www.rickykoo.com. It's RICKYKOO, rickykoo.com. And you can get a complimentary consult and start to understand what your next step will be in your career. So I highly, highly recommend it. So Ricky, let me ask you this. If you could give, and I'm going to kind of bifurcate this question, but if you could give your younger self advice, or you could give someone who's coming into their first role in management advice, do kind of a combo. What's one thing that you'd really like to say, hear this and remember it?
Oh, I were to give my younger self advice on this, there's a lot of lessons that I needed to learn. But if I were to identify one thing, it would be to stop seeking external points of views and letting that get in your way. Because I personally did that a lot. I looked externally a lot of times for answers, And what ended up happening was you ask 10 people the same question and you'll get 10 different answers,
Correct.
right? And so it it's helpful to ask for references and ask for opinions from other people. But when you start noticing that, this is actually making me doubt myself more and it's making
Exactly.
my self confidence be lower, which a lot of people experience, myself included, that is an indication that you need to stop listening to the noise externally then and focus inward because you reach a certain point where you gather information from the outside world as data, and that's okay. But once you start letting that dictate how you should think or how you should feel or impacting your own self-confidence, that is a sign that you need to watch for and know that, okay, I need to shut out the outside world at this point and think about what really matters to me then. What's important to me? What do I want to do? Because that's where the power comes in. That's where the action takes place for you.
Right, exactly. I do wanna take a little bit of a left turn here because I really do think this is so important. We know that a lot of people who are high potentials, who are super talented, who may not really believe that they have the ability to advance in their career, but they're definitely high potentials,
Mhm.
suffer from what's called imposter syndrome.
Right.
It's never enough. There's that drive for perfection. And I think a lot of high potentials, and especially people who are diverse, really judge themselves harshly.
Mhm.
And they may have a great accomplishment and it's not enough. They're on to the next goal right away. How would you coach a client around imposter syndrome?
I think the something that can be very simple and can be helpful is if you have high standards for yourself and you know that you are high potential, high achieving, take a step back and think about someone that you really care about. So a very close friend, right? If they were in the same situation as you, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them? And usually the advice isn't, "You're not doing enough. You're not good
Right.
enough," right? It's, "You're doing great. Look at what you've accomplished already. These are all the things that you're able to do, and you're still able to be your authentic self," right? It's very motivating. It's very empowering. So just by taking a step back and observing, I'm using air quotes, observing yourself almost from a third person's perspective, that takes ourselves out of our own bias and out of our own minds and really allows us to see, wow, I am actually doing really great. I'm making great progress. I have a lot of value. And I think that's a very important exercise that I take my clients through sometimes because as humans, it's very easy for us to get so tunnel visioned and in our own biased ways, especially for people that hold themselves to high standards that usually are not realistic. We don't hold ourselves to the same standards that we hold a close friend or a family member. So when we shift that, that allows you to see objectively like, oh, wow, okay, I'm actually doing pretty well. And the outcome usually is more openness and more flexibility for you to then continue to be effective in what you do.
Yeah, one thing that we've talked about, in particular is, the accomplishment tracker, or I call it logging your wins, where I know you have your clients do this, where they really sit, just take 10 minutes and list, like, "Here's all the things I accomplished this
Right.
week." And, we forget to do that because it's just the way our brains work. We
Yes,
tend to stay in the
absolutely.
negative. Yeah, we really do. So, if you could tell yourself one thing at the start of your career that you didn't know, what would you say to yourself at the start of your career? If you're looking at, Ricky going into that first corporate gig, what would you wanna tell Ricky?
I would tell Ricky hard work and great work alone is not going to get you to a successful career. It's not going to get you noticed. It's not going to get you promoted. Hard work alone is not going to get you there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so true. Before we go on to, because I want to ask you about your coaching style. I know it, but I want to hear you articulate it. I just want to let listeners know you can follow Ricky on Instagram, which is how I found him. It's amazing content at Coaching with Ricky on Instagram, or you can reach out to him at his website and you can book your complimentary coaching call, and that is rickykoo.com, RICKYKOO.com. And I highly recommend it if you're feeling a little stuck or if you're knowing that you want to step into that next role, you want to move up the leadership ladder, you have something to contribute, but you're dealing with maybe some external or internal challenges. Book a call with Ricky. You can reach him at Ricky Koo, RICKYKOO.com. So, Ricky, talk to me about your coaching style because I have an idea about it, but share it with our listeners because it's really quite powerful. I've watched you coach. You're awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I like to just when people ask me, "What's your style?" or "What is coaching like with you?" I just tell them, "Just try it. Book the 30-minute session and experience it yourself," because it's very hard to articulate the feeling of being coached and the power that comes from coaching. So if I were to put it into words, I would describe it almost as I'll use the words of a client that I had a session with this past week, and they said, "Ricky, your sessions are like career therapy," and I think that kind of beautifully puts my style into two words together because I have a psychology background, so there's naturally this more people spiritual side of me that I've always had. It's part of my personality and it shows up in my videos and just in conversations with me in general. But I also have this very, very pragmatic side of me, practical, pragmatic side of, okay, I can be self-reflective, I can observe, and I can take in a lot of information, but what do I want to do about it, right? How are we going to move forward? And
Mhm.
I think that is what shows up in my coaching a lot of times where people experience this balance of both feeling heard, feeling seen, and building up confidence, along with, okay, now let's put together a plan. Let's strategize. Let's talk about how this awareness or these observations or realizations through coaching sessions can propel you forward into achieving your goals. That, in a nutshell, would be my style. It's the blend of both spiritual, people oriented, and action focused.
Uh, a highly emotionally intelligent approach. Right, exactly, because you can have the deepest understanding, but if you can't take a step-by-step strategic approach to doing whatever it is you're trying to do, I love that. I wanna ask you, this is a big topic lately about bringing your authentic self to work,
Mm,
and how can you be authentic, but also still in the workplace, but also still maintain some sense of privacy?
mhm.
Talk to how you coach your clients around that possible challenge.
It is a very tricky topic because it's different for everyone, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
There isn't a guidebook to say, this is exactly how you should draw the lines between professional versus personal. My belief and the way that I coach my clients on this topic is that the more you can show up as yourself in the workplace, the easier it will feel. And usually, the more success and happiness you'll experience in the workplace. That's my experience. And I say that because I used to be closeted. So I started my career as a closeted gay man. So nobody knew anything about who Ricky was outside of my suit and
Sure.
tie professional attire, right? And so I very much showed up differently depending on the situation and the environment I was in. Um, there's something called code switching that happens, especially for minorities, right? Where
Correct.
it's a
Yes.
linguistic term, but it basically speaks to, depending on which situations you're in, there's a switch that happens where you either change your language, change your behavior, sometimes even change your thought process to cater to the environment that you're in. And
Mhm.
so as a minority, often what you see is you show up at work and you have this thought in mind of how you're supposed to show up, how you're supposed to act, how you're supposed to think. And that over time changes who you are as a person. I personally felt that and knew that that was happening when I started my career. I think that's what actually allowed me to be so successful, to be seen as the high achiever, the doer, right? But that was only short term. It got me maybe a few years into my career.
Mhm.
And then I kind of hit the slump where I was like, huh, how come I'm not moving up as quickly anymore?
Right.
Right. And what I realized was I was constantly code switching. I was constantly shifting my own self to say, okay, now I need to put my Ricky at work hat on and completely shut out my personal life. And what that does is it takes up a lot of your brain power. It takes up a
Yeah.
lot of your emotional power as well. And it it moves you from feeling more like yourself to feeling like a fraud. And that's where the imposter syndrome and all that starts
Mhm.
creeping in as well.
Mhm.
So when I talk to clients who a lot of times come to me with this topic in mind of what is that balance, right? Where is that line that you draw of how real can I be at
Right.
work versus myself? I think you're always going to show up somewhat differently, right? You're not going to show up at work the same way you show up at home with your
Right.
significant other, for example.
Right.
Just like you won't show up and talk to your parents probably compared to like a best friend, right? And I think that's okay. But something that I like to tell my clients is think 10 years from now in your current situation. Think back on the current situation and imagine yourself 10 years from now. Would you be proud of yourself in how
Yeah.
you're behaving and how you're acting? And if the answer is no, or if there's question in that, that usually indicates that there's something that you're doing or saying in your current environment that is not authentic to who you are. And that usually indicates an opportunity for you to kind of change that a little bit to align more with who you are and who your values are. Because while you can do that in the short term and it can work for you, over time in the long run, it really will start to eat at you.
Yes.
And the farther and farther away you will get from who you are as a person. Um, and that's not how you want to show up because again, going back to your own uniqueness, you need to use that and leverage that
Correct.
as your strength, right? There's nobody else out there in the world who can do things like you do, who are
Right.
you, and so the further out you start acting and behaving like someone else, the further away you are from your authentic self.
Yeah. And the more problematic it becomes because that can create a really insidious type of burnout.
Absolutely.
Just really, really tough. So let's talk about some of the biggest challenges that someone who is diverse and who wants to climb the leadership ladder may
Mhm.
face. You had mentioned code switching, which, yeah, is a big issue, and sometimes you do have to do it, depending on if you're talking to people in finance. You
Mhm.
wouldn't talk to people in marketing in the same way. On the other hand, you don't want to deny parts of your personality
Right.
or your talents just because you're afraid of exposing yourself. But what are some of the real challenges that you see consistently when someone who is diverse is saying, you know what, I want to be career tracked? What are some of the things you typically coach around?
One of the most common things that come up is this misalignment of
Yeah,
expectations.
yeah,
So what I mean by that is a client comes to me and says, I feel like I'm ready. I know I'm ready because I've been doing a lot of great work. But their manager or their manager's managers have a different point of view. They have a different perspective. And that's where the misalignment happens, where an individual thinks and feels, I am a leader. I should be promoted into this leadership role. I'm ready. But what they're hearing externally is something completely different. And so, what I work with my clients on is self branding. That is something that directly impacts how people perceive you, right? So a lot of times this misalignment that we see is a result of people perceiving you in a very different way than how you may want to be perceived or how you think you're being perceived. So with especially diverse people and people in minority communities, I'm an immigrant. We didn't grow up having the luxury of thinking about who am I, right? What do I want? Who is Ricky? We grew up in a very survival mode, right? We looked at our parents who lived paycheck to paycheck, and it was very much just struggling to exist. It wasn't you know, a very exploratory, creative question of self, right? We didn't have that kind of time or energy to spend. It was very much focused on financial security and
Mhm.
focused on stability. And so that's the same pattern that I see when I have clients come to me, especially from underrepresented communities, because they're so used to being in that mindset of more tangible things, right? Aspects of money and title and things like that. But what they struggle to realize and to see is that actually matters less and less the higher up you move.
Correct.
Because what leaders look for actually when they want to promote people are not the work that you're doing, are not the technical skills, are not all the certifications that you may have gotten and checked all those boxes. It's actually who you are as a person and how you show up. And it goes back to your self brand. So by focusing on your self brand and how you actually want to be perceived and thinking about that intentionally, that allows me to work with my clients to say, okay, if this is how you want to show up, let's talk about how you actually are showing up. What are some of the data points and evidence that you're hearing from people? And most of the time, there is a complete disconnect where they're saying, I want to be seen as a leader. I want to be seen as very capable and being able to influence and drive change. But the feedback they're getting is, you're great at your work, you delivered this project on time, all these very tangible things. And so it's shifting that perception that is a big focus area for minorities.
Yeah. Which leads me to a question, and again, another left turn. But so many times when people are really good at their job, they may not feel comfortable speaking up and speaking outside of what's seen as their area of expertise. Even though
Mhm.
they may have come up with some really brilliant solution,
Right.
they're just not comfortable speaking up. So how would you coach a client to speak up?
I'm laughing because I'm an introvert at heart. I've always been very, very quiet and reserved. That was all the feedback that I was getting earlier on in my career, and even as a kid, right? My mom would describe me as, "Ricky's such a good kid. He's a rule follower. He's very quiet," right? And so all my life, I've heard people tell me, "You need to speak up more," right? And it makes me think of this silly story, which I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but
I
I'll
love
bring
this
it back
story.
here.
Share. So do the
So,
listeners.
so as a young kid, we immigrated from Hong Kong to Florida to the United States. It was a whole new world, right?
Uh,
We had McDonald's, which I was like, wow, and Taco Bell, and all these new things where I was like, we didn't really have these things in Hong Kong where it was just part of our normal life. So going to McDonald's was a big treat for us as a family. So we would go, and I like to eat my French fries with ketchup.
mhm,
And so back then, they wouldn't just give you ketchup automatically. You had to ask for it.
uh-huh.
And so I remember I was maybe 7 or something like that, 7 or 8, and I would be so nervous to ask for ketchup.
Yeah.
And I'd be like begging my older brother and older sister and my parents, "Can you get ketchup for me?" And my my mom would say, "No, you need to go ask for it yourself." And I would, be sweating and so nervous, but I really wanted the ketchup, and I would work up my courage, walk up to the counter and whisper like, "Can I have some ketchup, please?" And when you said, how to develop your ability to speak up more, that just made me think of that little Ricky because I was always so nervous about speaking up, even just asking for something so simple like ketchup. Um, and now fast forward to present day, right, where I actually empower people and guide people to speak up. I think it's so ironic that I came from that very
Oh,
same
no,
spot.
it makes such sense because you had this challenge
Mhm.
and you learned how to overcome it.
Yes.
And quite honestly, this is where you get coaches who have the most empowering style because you walked through that path and you figured it out and now you're sharing with other people.
Yes.
And that is so, so important.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
important.
So to give a little tip that I like to share, usually
Please,
I only share this with my clients, but this is special
please,
because
please
I'm
share.
really enjoying this conversation. But a very, very, very simple trick that I myself used throughout my career
Mhm.
just to get more comfortable with hearing my own voice, because that was one of the biggest challenges. It wasn't about just having opinions, because I always had opinions, right? It was a matter of how do I vocalize that,
Yeah,
especially in group settings. That was very, very daunting for me. So something that I practiced was I was always in meetings. So, whether it's a staff meeting or meetings with clients or just meeting with coworkers in general, the feedback that I was getting was Ricky is so quiet. And that became my brand over time. And
right.
I wanted to break that perception because I didn't want to be the quiet person. I had good thoughts and good perspectives. I just needed to be more comfortable sharing that and be more confident sharing that. So, what I started practicing was setting myself one goal for every meeting that I'm in throughout the day. For every meeting that I'm in, I just need to ask one question. And it started with that. It wasn't even a statement. It was just, how can I be curious, especially in environments where I may not be the most knowledgeable on the topic that's
Mhm.
being discussed, right? Just ask a question. It's as simple as that. And so I started practicing that. And over time, what happens is I started getting excited to join meetings now to be like, ooh, what's going to be my question for today, right?
Right,
And what I started seeing was when I asked questions, sometimes that actually led to a different outcome in the
right.
conversation. Even in topics where I was surrounded by engineers or people that were very, very smart in what they do and experts in those areas, when I asked questions just out of curiosity, it sparked something. It sparked innovation. It sparked creativity where people were like, oh, I never even considered that, or that's interesting, right? And so that over time built up my confidence as well, to where I started blending, not just asking questions, but sharing my perspective and opinions. And over time, what that does is people then start gravitating towards you. They start gravitating to, oh, I want to hear from Ricky now. Like he has really insightful questions,
Exactly.
and that became just something that I got very comfortable with. So it started with just that small, small step and goal to say, I'm just going to ask one question in every meeting. That's it. And it feels like it's a lot less pressure and it's very doable. So that's something I would share with anyone listening to just try.
I love the practical advice, and I also love too that you acknowledge it's uncomfortable.
Hmm.
So get comfortable with being uncomfortable because it does go away, but
Yes.
it's a rinse, wash, repeat kind of a function where you just keep showing up. You do that one thing, you ask that one question, and then maybe the next meeting, you ask the question and you make the comment. So I think practical advice for so many of us who coach and so many, and I have my own coach, I need coaching.
Hmm.
It's
We
just
all
so
do.
important to like take that one step and just keep showing up. So I'd also like to ask you about when someone is moving from that director level
Hmm.
to that VP level, what are some of the challenges you see some clients or most clients face when, because director level, you can fly a little bit under the radar depending on the company. VP level, you're pretty much out there exposed.
Right.
What are some of the challenges that you coach your clients through as they take that leap from going from an arena that maybe not everybody's watching to an arena where everybody's watching?
Mhm. So a couple things. One is a behavior change needs to happen. When you shift from being a director to VP, what I often see is, I mean, by the time you get to that level in your career, that means you're highly capable, right? You're able to do your job effectively, but you need to change your behavior in the sense that you no longer can be the person that does work, that does everything, right? You need to hire people for areas that you may be lacking, right? You need to hire people to help balance out your development areas for yourself so that they can help drive more growth for your team. And so it's this behavior shift that sometimes I see people fail at. And when they, cross from director to VP, they struggle because they're still trying to hold on to what they know, their comfort level and their expertise of what got them there. but you need to completely shift that and think of it in the sense of I'm no longer Ricky, just doing the work and being accountable for my team. I'm actually a public figure in a sense where people in other teams and other departments are also looking to me and at me to learn and to grow. And in order to do that, you need to scale. You can't do everything yourself. So
Exactly.
there's a bit of letting go that you need to do, and asking more questions instead of coming up with answers. Because leading up to a manager and even director level, people come to you with questions to ask for answers. But when you get to VP and above, oftentimes it's more about you questioning and challenging people to think and to share their perspectives to draw that out of them, which then goes back to the importance of having diverse teams so that you have diverse voices and diverse perspectives that come up in a room to drive to the best outcome for the team and for the company. Um, and I think something that is important to call out also is when you're a VP level, even if you think the smallest thing you're doing or saying might not matter to you, it matters to someone. And time again, I've seen people in those senior levels be surprised when, let's say, they're in a meeting or at an all hands, or they share something about them, whether it's personal, of like, oh, I have a dog, or whatever it might be, people afterwards come up to them and say, "Oh, that really resonated with me," and they're surprised by it. And that's because people are watching, right?
Yeah.
People are watching and wanting to learn. And so there's a good side, which is if you show up as your true self and you have empathy and integrity, people watch that. But if you are the type of leader who also sometimes curses or shows up in an
Mhm.
aggressive way
Mhm.
or have negative moments that may come up as not as productive, people are also watching that and taking note and maybe saying, ooh, I actually don't want, I want to make sure I avoid working with that leader, or I want to
Exactly.
avoid having that quality for myself. So people are constantly watching for the good and the bad.
Exactly. And remembering it.
Yes,
And remembering it. So,
exactly.
please share what's coming up next for you because I know your schedule is super booked. You are super busy. You're doing a lot of speaking. Share what's coming up next for you.
Yes. So, in the immediate term, I have a little vacation because everyone needs a
Good.
little break, right? So I'm actually going to Barcelona tomorrow, and I'll be there for a week. It's both work, but also vacation at the end. And I'm just excited to have a little bit of a break. I think that's important for everyone to
Yes.
have space and time to self-reflect. So I'm really looking forward to that. In terms of my business, what's coming up next is I'm in the process of writing a book, which I'm hoping to finish by the end of this year, 2024. And so that's been my biggest focus. And the book is centered around leadership lessons from minority lens. And so I think it's something that's going to be very personal, where I incorporate a lot of these stories that I've encountered myself and just come up with what did I learn from it and share it with the world. So that's something that I am excited for. And of course, continuing to post videos on Instagram and on YouTube, because that's where I make a lot of connections and I meet people from around the world. I mean, that's
Yes.
how we connected.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
just so great to be able to meet people.
Yeah. I love that you're writing a book and you're going to incorporate your own experience because I know for many people who are diverse, and I know this happened for me too. I looked around in the company I was working in, and everybody in the C-suite was, it was the John,
Mm-hmm.
Bob, Dick scenario, white
Exactly.
male. And it's so empowering to see someone who's a leader when that leader looks like you.
Absolutely.
And so I am gonna read that book. So for listeners, I would share with you, follow Ricky on Instagram. These are just these awesome nuggets of teaching. If you are really interested in advancing in your career, you want to learn how to be a leader, how to be an emotionally intelligent leader, how to be a leader who stands in integrity, and not be a leader who's incompetent. Follow Ricky. He is at Coaching with Ricky, or you can go to Ricky's website, which is www.rickykoo.com, RICKY KOO.com, and you can schedule a complimentary coaching session with Ricky, and it will be so beneficial for you to just get some really awesome coaching. I really do encourage everybody to get coaching. So, Ricky, if there was one message you wanted to share with listeners and you really want them to hear this message, what is that message you want to share?
I'll keep it nice and short.
Oh, no, as long as you want,
This is very
because these
important.
are words of wisdom. Make it
I
as long
would
as you want.
I would say it's to define your worth before someone else does. And that's a lesson that I think everyone needs to hear and to believe, because if you don't know your own worth and you don't believe your own worth, people aren't going to acknowledge it. So it's really needs to start with you. And how you do that is through coaching, self-reflection, self-development, and asking for and accepting the help that is available to you and the resources that are out there, right? And moving away from this thought of I need to do everything myself,
Yeah,
and being able to say I can do everything myself, but I actually accept this help from X, Y, and Z. And I think that will lead you to knowing your wealth, knowing your worth much quicker, which will open up so many doors for you in your work and in your life.
yeah. And I would just add to that, in practicing self-compassion, which you talked about. You said very clearly when that voice comes in saying, oh, it wasn't good enough. We say things to ourselves we would never say to people we care, let alone people we don't like.
Exactly.
We're saying these bad things to ourselves. So I love that. That was brilliant. Are there any other things you'd like to share? Please share your Instagram and your website again one more time,
Of
please.
course. Yeah. I'm on Instagram at Coaching with Ricky, and also YouTube at Coaching with Ricky. And my website is rickykoo.com, RICKYKOO.com. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm so happy that we've made this connection. And I'm looking forward to any listeners out there who may be interested in a free 30-minute coaching session to get to know one another. I'm happy to connect.
Awesome. It was really my honor and pleasure to have you on this podcast today. I really do think the world's not in a great place. Not enough people have fresh water. None of people have enough food. There's global warming. There's so many problems. And if we don't have greater diversity in leadership, we are not going to be able to solve these problems. So I so appreciate you being here, Ricky, and the work that you do helping to ensure there is greater diversity in all leadership and senior leadership. I am right there with you. Thank you very much for being here today. It was really my honor.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It was great speaking with you. I appreciate it.